Hello everyone and welcome to CS Triple One. This is week 8 and I am Priyanka Sharma. We'll be covering the introductory video in this session on do and while loops. Should you have any difficulties, feel free to email on priyanka.sharma@usp.ac.mj. So before we begin with loops, we need to understand each loop. To proceed with while loop, we need to know the purpose. So, the purpose of while loop is used to repeat a section of code an unknown number of times until a specific condition is met. For example, say we want to know how many times a given number can be divided by 2 before it is less than or rather equal to 1. So this could be one of our examples where we can apply our while loops. Now how a while loop works. But before we get down to navigate how our while loop works, we need to understand the skeleton of a while loop. So how we write in fact a while loop? You have a while, that is a reserved word, then straight after that a condition in brackets, open braces, close braces, and there you go. This is general structure of your while loop. But on the other hand, we need to understand how a while loop works. So for any condition of while loop, it is as such. You have while condition. So if the condition is true, the program enters the body of the statement in order to execute those program or line of codes rather. So if the condition is false, the program simply exit from the loop and enters into the statement outside the loop. This is generally how a while loop works. Say for example, if I have to explain you using a flowchart, then how it would be. Again, a while loop is a control flow statement that allows code to be executed repeatedly based on a Boolean condition. The Boolean condition is either true or false. The while loop be brought or thought of as a repeating if statement. Okay. So this is a general structure or rather the skeleton of a program. You have your while, the based on Boolean condition, and of course your looping statement. So if I have to digest the idea of the while loop, how it works into a flow diagram, I would simply say you start or rather the program starts, okay? It checks the condition. What is the condition or rather the while loop, right? This while is a reserved word. When it starts or rather the while condition starts, then it checks the condition. The program checks the condition, and here in our flowchart we could explain that the condition on the condition a decision is made whether it's true or false. Okay, so if the statement is true, the program continues with looping statement and check the condition. It goes on and on until this condition becomes false, because once the condition becomes false, the program will exit from the initial while loop and goes to execute the other lines of code, right? So it is very important for us to understand with respect to our dev C++ program. Of course, we need to declare a header file, right? Hash include iostream using namespace std, and there is one main function, that is in main function. Please do not forget your semicolon, open braces, close braces, and there you go, return 0. That becomes the skeleton of a program. Now in between, if I have to give you an example of how we are going to use a while loop with respect to our dev C++, I have populated one example. For instance, if the integer value I has an integer value which is equal to 5. So in other terms, if we have to write the program, we would say that int I is equal to 5. That simply means this I contains an integer value, that is a whole number, and that whole number is 5. So we have to have that imagination. Currently 5 is stored in I. So while this is a reserve word, we are using a while loop in here. While I, right? So the value of 5, this becomes the condition. 5 is less than 10, right? So we have to decide, or rather the program has to decide. At this point in time, we have to decide, right? So when it is being executed by dev C++, the program decides 5 is less than 10. Of course, it is true. Yes, obviously 5 is less than 10, isn't it? So if it's true, the condition is true, the program enters the body of the statement in order to execute these lines of code. So if we have to, or rather the program has to execute these lines of code, the next line it says I plus plus. I plus plus simply means I plus equals 1 or I plus 1, okay, which is equal to this value I, in other terms or simple terms, 5 plus 1. So you add 1, which becomes 6. So currently in the value of I, the update is 6 instead of 5 because we have added 1, okay. And then straight after that, we don't have to display 6 anywhere, it is just stored in I. Then we have to cout means we have to output, isn't it? Output into the console window when we execute and run our program. Cout, whatsoever is given into our codes will be displayed. So for the first statement, GFG is written, right? Or output, executed output would be 1 GFG, okay? Why not /n? Because I have said in between the codes, this /n means it's a reserve word for a new line. That simply means if I have to, or if the program has to execute another GFG or any output for that matter, it will output into the new line and not into the same line. That /line or ENDL, in other words, will represent a new line. Then you close the braces, okay? So once that is done, 5 is less than 10, the program will not go outside. It will loop. That loop means repeat, okay? One point in time you repeat unless or until the condition is false. So this condition will loop, right? So this statement will loop. Another, now the value of I is 6. So is 6 less than 10? Of course, 6 is less than 10. Then again it will enter into the loop, output, increment the value of I, go again. This will loop, right, till the condition is false. So for instance, now the value contains 9. Is 9 less than 10? Of course, 9 is less than 10, isn't it? Then the condition will be met again, okay? The output will be there again. But what if the value 10 is there? So is 10 is less than 10? No, 10 is not less than 10. There and then the loop is stopped or the program exit from the loop and goes outside in order to execute other lines of codes. Is that clear? So that's how a while loop happens in C++, or if you are using dev C++, this is a dev C++ example, okay? So any C++ environment, the logic remains the same. Now it's very important, just maybe in few lines, we need to understand what are the advantages and disadvantages. So just to name one each, one advantage of loops could be, especially while loop, okay? So like all loops, while loops execute blocks of code over and over again. The advantage to a while loop is that it will go, or rather repeat, as often as necessary to accomplish its goal. This is an advantage, right? So the advantage is of a while loop is to, or rather it will repeat, right? We don't have to write chunks of codes in order to do the same line of code, just few lines of code. So for example, in this example, we don't write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 5 lines of code in order to, do this looping. Instead, we just use a while loop, the same thing happens. So there and then, that's what this statement says, that while loop, it will go repeat as often as necessary to accomplish the target goal. While the disadvantage of these control structures is that it poses a serious problem when you do not include a way of changing your conditions to an active value. Now this applies to any of the loops, right? Loop is loop, right? So that simply means it's a repetition of the task at some point in time. So if the condition does not becomes false due to some reasons, then unfortunately the program will keep on looping at some point in time. It will not proceed any further. Is that clear? So that could be one of the disadvantage, just for your knowledge only, okay? And to understand for loop, right? So while loop and for loop, the logic is same, the output would be same, but presentation in certain programming language, the structure is quite different. Okay, I'll let you know before I end this our short tutorial or short video rather. I'll show you the difference between or similarity between your for and while loop. So your for loop provides a concise way of writing the loop structure. Unlike a while loop, a statement for statement consumes the initialization condition, increment or rather the decrement in one line, thereby providing a shorter, easy to debug structure of looping. For example, how a for loop works. This is the skeletal or rather the structure of the program. You have for, initialization, semicolon, condition, semicolon, updation. When I say initialization, one example would be I is equal to 0, for instance, or I is equal to 5. That is initialization. You initialize a value, right? Then in I is equal to 5 or in I is equal to 0. That is one of the examples. Then you have the condition. The condition is I less than 10, for instance. Okay, that becomes the condition. And updation means, for example, either I plus plus or you can say I minus minus or I plus 1 depending on the condition. That could be one of the examples, okay? But for loop, it goes in one line, unlike while loop. You have for is the reserved word, then you have braces, right? Or brackets we call it. Initialization, semicolon, you have the condition, semicolon, you have the updation. And there you go, open braces, close braces, the body of the loop. And of course, if the condition is false, then it exits the statement outside the loop, okay? So, how this loop works? First of all, the program checks, right? First is initialization. After initialization, the program checks for condition. What is the condition? So, if the condition is true, the program enters into in order to do the body of the loop. If not, or with respect to other statements that needs to be executed within this body, okay, body of the loop. So unfortunately at some point in time, if the condition is false, then what happens? So if the condition is false, it simply executes outside of the body, okay. The logic remains same with respect to your while loop and for loop, but how it is represented, how it is executed is a little bit different. And of course, the for the same question, the output also remains the same, okay. Now, if I have to explain you using a flowchart, how the logic will flow, okay? For loop, of course, this is the skeletal of your for loop for loop program. You have initialization, right? Condition. Then you have testing condition. Then either you have increment or decrement, of course. And then, of course, you have in open and close braces, you have the body statement of the loop. Now, if I have to show you using a for loop and explain you how this flows, so start, if a for loop starts, right, initialization, checks for initialization, then straight after that, you have the testing condition. It checks the condition, right, and make the prior decision. That's why we use this symbol, okay. The decision happens. So the decision is either the statement is, or rather the condition is true, or rather the condition is false. So if the condition is true, increment or decrement depending on the scenario being given, then again it will loop, check the condition, again it will loop, check the condition, right? So once the condition is false, then it will execute or exit rather to exit the loop. So it will become false and end the loop there and then. If not, then it will continue with increment or with other condition body statement. Okay, that's how for loop works. Now if I have to explain you using dev C++ example, okay, so of course we have your header file hash include iostream using namespace std. Please do not forget your semicolon. Then one function is there, that is your in main function. Then inside you have a for loop. Now in this case int I is equal to 0. So for loop is there, for is a reserved word. So if I is equal to 0 instead of 5, right? So I have taken a screenshot where the value was 5 initially. So if I is equal to 0, right? Because initially I contains a value of 0, isn't it? So I is less than 10. Is I less than 10? Yes, I is less than 10, of course. I plus plus. Okay. So you do I plus plus. That simply means I value plus 1. See out the statement. Okay. The see out is there. GFG. Now this will loop unless the condition becomes false. And when the condition will become false, if 9 is there. So if I contains the value of 9, right? I contains the value of 9. So it will loop again. Why it will loop again? Because 9 is less than 10. What about if 10 is less than 10? No, 10 is not less than 10. Okay. If it was 10 is less than and equal to 10, then that condition would be true. But in this point in time, if I contains the value of 10, 10 is not less than 10. So this becomes false. Then the program goes and executes. Actually, it exits from the for loop and goes and executes other lines of codes. Okay. And this is the output respectively. You can always try it in your own time and see what is the output. Okay. And if you change the values and see then what happens. Okay. And if you change the condition, you can also observe what happens. Okay. Now it's very important for us also to understand what are the advantages and disadvantages. So I may highlight one each. Now some point in time we use a for loop for its simplicity, structure and stability. Okay. So advantages would be for loop simplicity and stability. They are simpler in their layout, of course, that simply means the framework, and hence are quite stable due to their simplicity, isn't it? And one of the drawbacks we could highlight is since these are having a simple layout, so are easier to construct. Okay, so that could be one of the advantage for the construction purposes. Whereas the drawback could be enhanced for loop is that it cannot transverse the elements in reverse order. It could be one of the disadvantage. So in this world, people, we have advantages and disadvantages, but it's very important for us to choose right conditions at right point in time. That simply means whether you are using for loop or while loop, thus the output will be same, right? And the logic will be same. But at some point in time, depending on the scenario, you can choose whatsoever is convenient to you or whatsoever you want to use it there and then. Okay, so you have an option. So in summary, I would say with respect to for loop and while loop, okay, for loop, initialization may be either in loop statement or outside the loop. Whereas your while loop, initialization is always outside the loop. In for loop, once the statement is executed, then after increment is done. Okay? So, whereas in while loop, increment can be done before or after the execution of the statement. In your for loop, it is normally used when the number of iteration is known. In your while loop, it is normally used when the number of iteration is unknown. Now, condition is a relational expression. In your while loop, condition may be expression or non-zero value. Whereas in your for loop, it is used when initialization and increment is simple. Whereas in your while loop, it is used for complex initialization, right? And while loop is used for entry control loops, whereas your for loop is used also for entry control loops. So this line could be one of the similarities of your for loop and your while loop. Now, if I have to highlight the structure wise or the framework wise, how a while loop is written and a for loop is written. So for your for loop, you have again your initialization, semicolon, condition, semicolon, and iteration. Right? And there you go, open braces, the statement, close braces. Statement simply means the body statement, okay? Whereas in your while loop, you have the condition, and straight after that, you have the body statements. So this is the summary, the difference and similarity between your for loop and while loop theoretically. So thank you so much. Thanks for watching.